Hey everybody, welcome to What the Flick, talking about The Deuce, Season 1, Episode 5. What kind of bad? Matt, Brett, Alonzo, what kind of bad? I don't know, I'm quite sure what that means.
Is that said in the episode at some point? I didn't pick up on it. I remember thinking, okay, I'll look out for this, but never hearing it, but that might just be me tuning out at some point.
I missed it, but I'm not always catching these things. So anyway, maybe we'll make our way back around to figure out what the title was. This was another sort of, I mean, there was some plot happening. We find out finally what it is. The Hush Hush Mob Project is a sort of city unofficially sanctioned massage parlor, which is designed to get the women off the streets. Which is no better for the women necessarily. We find out that Darlene takes the bus ticket not to escape but to recruit.
Right.
Which is hilarious.
Although you raise an interesting point, not to get, because we'll bring this up later.
Yes.
Arguably, something like that massage thing is maybe marginally safer because of people who are running it, as opposed to what we see happen to Candy in this particular episode, because she's flying solo.
But it is ultimately about exploitation and economic,
Right, because they're
just maybe a little safer exploitation.
A touch, yes.
Right, because as opposed to a hotel where there's just someone at the front just taking money and moving on, this is going to be, and I hate that I only think of Frank Savaca, because that's the character that was played on The Wire by the same actor who's overseeing the construction, but I feel like he will be more in charge. The question is, moving forward, what relationship does this create between the pimps and the massage parlor? And are these different women? And is that going to lead to the marginalization of the pimps?
I was gonna say, is this another thing where we're putting the black entrepreneur out of business? And that's actually a topic that's come up a lot lately. When you have all these people who are serving jail time for these minor pot offenses, and now that legalization is happening, and it's looking like the Philip Morrises of the world are going to kind of sweep in and take this over. It's like, where is the justice for the people who are doing this? What we now consider a victimless crime when it was still illegal.
Right, now the victim is the person, the entrepreneur who is selling what we now know is,
You brought up Frank, whose character's name I think is actually Bobby. Right, the friend, the brother-in-law.
The sister-in-law.
And he says, there's the scene, so one of the things that happens in this show is that although Vincent had initially said he's not really interested in this, he gets talked into doing this by Bobby, because Bobby says, doctor says I'm gonna stroke out if I stay at the construction site. And I couldn't help but think, like, man, this is not gonna be any less stressful.
They'll probably have the soothing Eastern music drone.
Like cucumber water.
Running the kind of behind the scenes whorehouse in the middle of New York is less stressful than running the construction site.
It's a mob-run massage parlor. I think they keep a hand in.
But then again, I don't know that that's any less stressful though.
And look at his last interaction with the mob. He was trying to run the bank scheme or whatever it was called, and they beat up all of his union guys. So you're absolutely very much. But I did.
Do you think he survives the season?
I hope so. My big question with this show is, will we follow the same characters year after year, or will we go explore, like in The Wire, a completely different world season over season?
I don't know, I get the, that's certainly a possibility, but I get the impression that they're sort of building up these people as a group of seemingly random characters who are all gonna have a major role to play, whether it's in the burgeoning pornography industry, whether it is in the sort of mainstreaming of the sex industry, whether it is, just of the interactions between the mob and the police. Like everybody, by the end of this series, or maybe even by the end of the season, we're gonna understand what role they have to play. Even the people who are documenting this, the reporter and Abby, like they're gonna be the people who are writing the books about this stuff later.
I think Abby ends up, I'd be shocked if Abby doesn't end up on camera. Like I really am thinking like she ends up coming into the business because she enjoys it, as opposed, maybe, I don't know, I could be wrong.
Is Abby the writer or the waitress? Who's
the
Abby?
waitress?
The waitress, yeah. Right. I see her, she's lost enough.
But maybe not.
Anything is possible at this point. What I find interesting about Abby though is that there's that, the notion of the sort of white savior character, where like she's going to buy Darlene that bus ticket, and get her away from this life, and Darlene is like, I've seen that life, and I've left that life, and I'm not going back to that life. Even though this one has its own problems, like I'm at least in charge of my, I have some sense of agency, even if I have a pimp, as opposed to being stuck in this tiny, go nowhere, like gossip choked small town.
One of the things I liked in this particular episode, and does it do a lot of driving the plot forward? Not necessarily, but there's some great moments, some really kind of illuminating and informative moments about kind of the day-to-day living this life, right? And most notably, Maggie Gyllenhaal puts in terrific performances here in almost every scene that she's in, right? The scene where she's with the boyfriend, right? The guy she goes out on the date with, and you see her still trying to navigate that relationship, and can she put her professional experience behind and actually have an authentic kind of connection with this guy? There's obviously the scene where the John beats her up, and then there's the scene, that great argument between her and Rodney, played by Method Man, right? Yeah. Is such a great scene where she's crying and then she's laughing and crying and like almost the absurdity of the whole thing. And he said, and the thing that I thought was really shocking in that moment, or not shocking, but one of the things that was the standout moment is when he says to her, "You don't belong here. Like you're kind of communicating like you're a cut above everyone else here," and that seems to drive her back to the producer.
Well, I think this episode and the previous episode have been this sort of mini arc of Candy realizing that this life is not going to work for her anymore. That maybe it never did, but certainly now it's not something that she can continue. And it's between the meeting the guy and having the relationship with him and sort of trying to eke that out, and the violence and all the other things, it's all sort of stacking up like there's no future here for me. And so yeah, the notion of then being able to go on camera, and I think as has been clearly hinted, she may start out being an on-camera performer, but she's clearly somebody who has the intelligence and the ambition to like have more of a controlling stake in adult movies as they become a thing.
Yes, I definitely see her turning into the producer of whatever it is. But I don't know if it was you, whoever said it, was the idea that you might not believe this character can exist on the street in this untouchable position, and because you see her exist outside the pimp structure.
Well,
we talked about that earlier.
My thing was just that I didn't believe that the pimps wouldn't try to pressure her, through stuff like the beating or whatever, to be handled by them just as a lesson to their own stables to not consider going free agent.
But to have it revealed that this is a cycle for her.
Yeah,
she goes, and that is, it just kind of proves, it deepens the character so much that she just kind of goes through it and she tries to cover it up. And that she is not above it by any means. She does get to this terrible place where she gets beat up, she has this conversation with Method Man, and then it turns into her kind of losing it, crying, and then going straight back into the same.
The bleakness of that is just astounding.
That's the clip you submit to the Emmys.
Right. And the other thing, the other couple of moments that also kind of resonate with this level of acknowledgement of this seemingly bleak existence, right? Which it'd be hard to argue that it's not. But when the two pimps, Rodney and the other one, are basically horse trading, right? And it's just
that's creepy.
It's super creepy, and every time you think, maybe these guys, like maybe there's some charm, and then you're like,
that is
literal commodification.
Right. It is the exact wording of player deals in professional sports, and a player to be named later. Like that is actually what they say.
Lexicon,
but then the girl that gets recruited, who comes up to New York, Bernice, like, okay,
Ginger,
right? Bernice / Ginger. First of all, she doesn't want to stay in Carolina, right? And so she goes to New York, and she quickly realizes, oh, this ain't modeling. Yeah, well, I'm not going back.
Yeah,
right. Like
immediately,
right? Immediately, like, I still ain't going back.
I did like the line in here that was, "Daddies, husbands, and pimps, they love you for who you are until you try to be someone else." at least pimps are upfront about it. Like,
that's
a great
everything
was building to like that quote that if it was The Wire would be like the one they show in the title card at the beginning of the episode, because that's what they would do.
Let's talk about Paul, the bartender. You know, that was the stings on gay men at that point were, it was literally like they could just pick you off the street.
Right, you were just coming out.
Yeah, for not a damn thing. You know, and I can't remember now. I think I know the club that he goes to, because I should have looked this up beforehand. I'm a bad gay. It was a legendary like New York dance spot, and I think Calvin Klein actually had a fashion show there once, and it was sort of like, but in the daytime it was kind of like, well, this is just a room. Like it wasn't, there was no charm to it or anything, but at night it was like.
To be clear, every club when it closes and they turn the lights on, there's that moment of like,
room. True.
So what is the takeaway from that scene where he decided he doesn't want to, you know, invite his roommate / boyfriend live-in guy who's more closeted than he, you know, he then shows up with random dude from the club, and then they all start doing the threesome. Like what's the takeaway from that?
That's
just like
the thing that happened.
But like and one of the moments in that
you are now responsible for.
I'm not answering this question.
Just like for me, it was that moment of like he's on the couch and like his boyfriend kind of comes to the door, and just like that look of after everything he's been through, just kind of looking and being like.
Well, he's also fucked up. I mean, he's he's on something, you know.
Right.
They need more communication in that relationship.
I don't think that we are intended to look at the way that couple works with bringing someone in as the avatar for every male gay relationship ever. I think it's just, you know, let's figure that's the way that one works, right? But also in the context
of the early 70s.
Right, it's the early 70s, right? It is which is a big thing. Like it's early 70s, few years out from the Summer of Love. AIDS has not hit yet. People are still fucking each other left and right, straight or gay.
And for gay men in the 70s, like having a lot of sex with other men was, and in itself, a revolutionary act. And that was what was, you know, it had been so closeted and so like made illegal, and was still in this day and age something you could get arrested for, even for nothing. You know, that there was the thing about the actual physical act. You know, you read books about that era or memoirs about that era, and it was like you know, when AIDS happened and people were like, oh, you know, gay promiscuity, they were missing the point that the right to be promiscuous and the right to be sexually active was the thing that the gay community had been fighting for up until that point.
Okay.
You know, that was part of their very existence.
Yeah, there is a lot of, it's hard not to call it world building in this episode.
Sure.
It's just that point where from what we're going to talk about in any given episode of this, I'm just like, I'm sitting there watching to be like, okay, so these kinds of rooms happen, and this, and then also, but also just like, oh, okay, this is the state of the laws right now, and this is how people get recruited into this prostitution ring.
Right, and I'm fascinated with what's the bartender's character's name?
Paul.
Paul. I'm fascinated to see where Paul's character arc goes in this story, right? Because Paul seems, out of a lot of characters that you can see their flaws, and you can see, like Paul seems one of the ones that is maybe least fucked up, right? Like, you know, granted, yes, you know, in New York, being gay in the 70s, like he's got a lot of cards dealt against him, but he seems relatively responsible.
I think like the good twin, he is somebody who hits the ground, like rolls with the punches, knows an opportunity when he sees it, and is just sort of like, is just going to sort of be there for when things start happening, and figure out a way to maybe profit from it, or at least be useful in it, you know.
Also, somebody pointed this out in one of the recaps I read. It might have been the AV Club, so I'm going to reference it. Love that Big Mike is a crossword puzzle guy.
Yeah.
Like,
I like this.
Sitting at the end of the bar doing the crossword.
And I like Abby's date with the college guys and realizing I have nothing in common with you people anymore.
Right, and so that's the thing, is like, why is she doing that? Vince's reaction to her when she says she's going on a date is just to kind of,
well, because you know he is wrapping his mind around the fact that she's in charge, as she told him last week, that she's the one guiding this thing. And her whole thing is like, well, yeah, we're fucking and that's great, but I'm gonna see other people because you and I aren't necessarily going to be a couple,
right, but you're still married.
Exactly, but in going out with somebody her age, she's like, oh yeah, I'm in the world now, and y'all are still in the ivory tower, and I have nothing in common.
It's like when you're in high school and all the cool girls are dating the college guys, and they're like,
right. And then the writer from the Amsterdam News.
Amsterdam News, yes.
So
I love those offices.
So
oh my God, all the wood paneling and typewriters. This was the best.
And so she's trying to get her story written and comes up against this wall of you need to be uplifting about this.
Right.
She's in the middle of it, just going but that's not how this is at all. Please let me write something and show it to you.
And that's an ongoing sort of history of any kind of subcultural, journalism or arts movement where it's like, oh, but this doesn't make us look good, and you
that's still a thing.
It's still a thing, yeah, and you get that with gays and with and other groups where it's sort of like, do we have to tell those stories, and even in the writers we now think of as the Harlem Renaissance, you had like Zora Neale Hurston. There were black intellectuals at the time that didn't like the fact that she was sort of recreating this kind of Southern patois in her novels, and it was like, oh, come on, we're educated now, we speak better than that, we don't need to write about people like that, So yeah, it's this thing where like, are you creating art or are you sort of propagandizing for your community?
I want to see what she is allowed to write, what she ends up, like how deep into it she ends up getting.
Sure.
And her like interview with
with the cops. Her relationship with both cops is, I love that part.
The whole overtime strategy was awesome. Right, like that was another one. Like the slice of like, here's the mechanics of how this life works, right? And the cops like, so you do the collar about 30 minutes out from end of watch because then you get to do overtime to do all the paperwork and everything else.
I love that's like, those behind the scenes looks at the fact that these are actual people doing these jobs, right. And the way that everyone in their in their employment will find out the shortcuts that make it easiest on them.
Which makes me think that the writers, and specifically Pellicano and David Simon, had to have been, certainly Pellicano over the course of the stuff that he's covered and the stuff he's written about as a crime writer, like that's the kind of stuff you have to pick up as you're talking to people who live that life.
Sure.
Right? And I love that shows up because it really adds, really grounds it.
And and it's, as trying to come up with a criticism of it, it's just like I'm taking down notes on how this world works.
Imagine getting a similar discussion about something in Game of Thrones.
Right.
Like, well, here,
the dragons are cranky in the morning.
Right, exactly. Like so here's why you actually don't start cleaning out the slop till the end of the day because it keeps you later, and then you'll get your own slop from the kitchen. Like,
I like the whole thing how they're they're so like police corruption, whatever, and then you've got Ralph Macchio like throwing envelopes at them in the middle of the night, like out of their car window. It's like, okay, well then this is a thing.
Yeah, and speaking of the corruption, the writer is so interested in the kind of like the pimp's life and that whole sex trade scene that she's right along with these cops, and she seems to not really even be interested in digging into the police corruption.
But that's really what this is. A lot of the writing about these kinds of issues is all about, because as a writer you come up with your general arc and your narrative, and then you come across things that complicate it for you because there are a lot of people taking practical approaches to this thing that you kind of, over time, it gets too complicated to explain in simple terms. And that's what's so great about a show like this, is you can have episodes that explore these nuances.
And I'm sure as a black female writer, she figures like, okay, I've been able to get the confidence of several of these women in the trade. They'll talk to me. So now if I can talk to a pimp, then that's a story I can do. Whereas like for her to just like, I'm gonna go talk to a bunch of cops, might not necessarily be the thing where they're gonna open up to me because why,
Do you think and then the relationship with the mafia, it seems like the beginning of every relationship with the mafia that you've ever seen, where they just kind of come in and be like, yeah, we'll readjust if it works out better.
It's all chill.
That's the one part where I'm just wondering what the hell, how it's like. I know that part's gonna go bad because it always goes bad.
What, you want to buy my restaurant? Sure.
Yes. Yeah, the thing that I am unlike a lot of shows that cover history, I'll often go and do some background research and kind of see where the reality is. And this one I'm not, because I want to keep guessing and I don't want to know where things are going. And so I'm fascinated to see, is it going to play out how much the mob is involved in the birth of the porn scene, either directly and helping this breakthrough, or just at a secondary level by setting up an environment that happens. Because you think about something like the massage parlor, where they're moving all of this sex off the streets. And hey, if you're at a consistent location, how tough is it to set up cameras, right? Like, are you laying the groundwork for studio space, right? And maybe you're starting to see, like, is that where this starts to happen initially?
Right, and just the business delegation of it all, where the mafia has identified there is money here in having a business that does this. So set up that business, and then it goes to Vince, who then goes to Bobby, and Bobby's just like asking all these questions, and Vince is like, I don't know any of this. But just figure it out.
I love that Vince is enough of a businessman and reliable enough that the mafia is like, just another business. You can handle this, right?
Yeah.
And he doesn't really want to, and he said, and he's laying the groundwork. Can I bring Bobby in, knowing that this is why he's doing it, because that's what Bobby wants? Right. And the mob guy's like, yeah, bring it. It's your business. You're responsible.
Yeah.
And you can't help but think, that's gotta. When Bobby strokes out,
you're gonna have to take over.
He's gonna have to take over. Sorry, Bobby.
You're gonna have to meet the VIG every week or whatever it is.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff in this episode. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, this is great TV.
Yeah. All right.
We're what, halfway through the season?
I don't know
Really?
how many
Already?
is
This is episode 5,
is it
right?
10 or 8?
God, I don't know. Hold on.
How many episodes?
I do want to point out, we mentioned it earlier, I like that we got more Method Man in this. I'm a big fan of his. I mean, over and above his music.
Oh yeah, 8. There's only 3 to go.
3.
Yeah.
But season 2 is happening, so
good.
There's that to look forward to. All right, we'll be back with more next week. Thanks.